interesting chapter. I am, covering this chapter for the first time. The reason why I am going to be covering this chapter from now on is because a lot of you end up taking intermediate microeconomics and more advanced economics course, where stuff like how does a consumer maximize his utility is never discussed, and you don't have a background on that, and you go to these courses where that is the theme of the course, that we want to understand how our consumers really make their purchasing decisions. And so in order to do a service to you, I am introducing this really complicated chapter. The chapter that we are about to start is going to talk about consumer behavior. It's going to give you answers to several critical questions. Chapter 10 is an analytical chapter, meaning that the ideas are more important than the numbers. There are going to be numerical calculations in this chapter, some quantitative measurements, but these are all abstract. They're artificial. These numbers and these numerical calculations really do not have any real-life implications, just like your elasticity measurements. Those were really real calculations. Are we all clear on that? So what we're going to do, in this chapter, we're going to use some calculations, abstract calculations, just to get the ideas in our head. And the ideas are critical ideas. So the objective of this chapter is to understand these three very, very related and critical questions. Let me explain to you the premise of the chapter. So we have talked a lot about our consumer, our buyer in this market. We have shown how his demand equates with supply, and we get a market equilibrium price and quantity and so on. So we really haven't asked the basic question about our consumer, which is very fundamental. The question is, how and why do our buyer buys the things that he or she buys? Why do you need a car? Why do we need milk? Why do we need this and that, right? We understand that part of our purchasing decisions are motivated by our survival, right? We need milk, we need food to survive. But then there are a lot of things that we buy which really does not affect our survival. We buy them for other reasons. Are we all clear on that? And economics have always been fascinated about why and how. Why and how? These are critical questions. Why do we buy so many things, and how do we buy so many things? Okay, we can have an operational answer to the first question, that we buy stuff because it makes us happy. We buy things because it sort of makes us happy, gives us satisfaction or whatever. Then question number 2 becomes critical. If we know that the reason why we buy things is because it makes us happy, then the next question is that how come you buy a lot of computer gadgets and I buy a lot of milk? Why? Why is that? I mean, you are trying to be happy, I am trying to be happy. Why is your happiness different from my happiness? Or is it? Is your happiness different from my happiness? These were critical questions because these are questions related to the behavior of our consumer. And I think we have spent sufficient time highlighting that behavior is kind of important, right? Whether you like something or not, whether the good that you are buying makes you sufficiently happy or not, really determines whether you are going to buy that good. So the first economist who really started thinking about these questions was the first microeconomist. His name is Alfred Marshall. He was a British economist. As I mentioned before, if I did not, let me repeat that again. Microeconomics is pretty old, right? Most of the theories that we have covered so far were developed about 200 years ago. So about 250 years ago, this Marshall guy started seriously thinking about how do we understand the consumer behavior. If we can convince ourselves that satisfaction or happiness is the objective of our consumer, that they want to get a maximum of their satisfaction, we need to be able to somehow measure that satisfaction. Otherwise, we really are not going anywhere. Because economists as economists, we really like numbers, right? We have numbers about our income, we have numbers about our price, we have numbers about how much we have bought. We should have some kind of measurement about our satisfaction, without which we really cannot explain how does our consumer buy things. Okay? He immediately ran into a problem. Immediately he realized that there are units of measurements for physical things like meter, like feet, like kilogram, like pounds. These are things that unit of measurement that are used to measure physical quantities. Happiness or satisfaction are not physical quantities. So how do you measure something that you, first of all, cannot really see, and most importantly, cannot really have a good idea about, right? There are a lot of things that you can measure that you cannot see, right? Like air pressure. But you have a good idea about what air pressure is and what air pressure does. That's how you came up with a unit of measurement. So for Marshall, the challenge was much more severe, that he knew that we really do not have enough good idea about what satisfaction is, what makes us happy. We really don't know. Even more complicated is the issue that our level of satisfaction is actually a relative concept, meaning that whether we are happy or not really depends on whether we are happy compared to some peer group that we have. So it's a relative concept, right? So if you ask a relatively middle income person, and we first have to define what middle income is. Imagine the middle income of a poor country such as Mexico is about $15,000 per year. Okay? So if you ask a middle income person in Mexico whether he or she is happy, the answer probably will be yes, right? That I'm doing okay, I'm middle income, and obviously you know by now that $15,000 per year is definitely not middle income for USA, right? So a person who is saying I'm doing really well in Mexico, the person with same kind of income in USA will probably say that they are not doing good at all, right? So you can see that there is a relativeness in how we define our happiness, even in terms of something that we can measure like income. If you want to go deep inside the head of individuals, you will find that comparing satisfaction is even more complicated, because we like things and we dislike things, right? You could be liking something like a video game more than I do. So how much happy you are going to get by buying a video game is going to be very different from mine. So we are talking about a lot of very complicated issues, right? So over 250 years of research, economists have sort of acknowledged or reconciled two things. First of all, they have acknowledge the fact that satisfaction can no longer be measured by other kind of stuff like feet or distance or whatever. So the best way to understand satisfaction is think about it in relative terms, which we are not going to cover in this class, because it's a very advanced concept. So some of you who if you take intermediate micro or some advanced course, you will talk about that. But then we need to really explain at least the process of how a consumer tries to maximize his or her satisfaction. And in order to do that, we're going to make some operational assumptions. We're going to say that satisfaction, just like the distance or weight, can be measured. And the unit of measurement for satisfaction will be called utils, something that Marshall developed, was under criticism for a long, long time. People have completely abandoned that concept, but we will maintain that idea because this is an introduction to macroeconomics course. At some point of time, we'll realize that this idea of utility becomes irrelevant. But we're going to start with this measurement by saying that we can measure level of satisfaction by a unit of measurement called utility or util. And that's an operational assumption. assuming that we can measure our satisfaction, we are now going to be facing with two critical questions. Given that we know how to measure satisfaction, what do you want to do as a consumer when you are going to a marketplace? We want to understand what you do when you go to a marketplace. When out of an infinite combinations of goods that are available, you only pick like 4 and come home happy. How do you do that? It's a very complicated process. How do we, out of so many different things, decide that we're going to buy this one, and that one, come home? What guides our decision-making process when we go to a marketplace? Right? Now, so when we look at this question and think about this question, we should realize that there are two parts of this puzzle. One part is that a consumer always will buy things that makes him or her most happy, or gives him the highest level of satisfaction. And the second part of the puzzle is that although we want to obtain the maximum level of satisfaction from our purchase from a market, some of these purchases are beyond our means. Some of these purchases are not feasible for us in the sense that we have limited income. Notice that if the scarcity of income was not an issue, we would not be having this discussion today, because then the answer to this question of how you make your purchasing decision in a marketplace becomes irrelevant. If you have unlimited income, you can buy whatever you like. You can buy whatever you like, and in that process you can choose the stuff that gives you the maximum level of satisfaction. You can always come home happy. But our life is not simple. Our life is complicated because first of all we have limited income, and second of all we have to use that limited income to get the maximum satisfaction out of what we buy. And that's what makes this chapter very fascinating. So that's sort of like a very lengthy introduction. Notice that I have spent a lot of time just laying out the introduction because this is a cerebral chapter. What we are going to cover does not really confine to the numbers that we have just calculated. Numbers for elasticity had an interpretation. The numbers that we are going to calculate really doesn't have any interpretation. The ideas behind the numbers are what we want to understand. So I'll do my best to convey these ideas, convey the calculations that we're going to look at. But if I am not successful, please read them and get back to me so that I can clarify some of your concepts or confusions. So, a very lengthy discussions. I'm going to start today with this idea called budget constraint. Okay? So, a budget constraint is what I have just talked about. A budget constraint is a formal way of outlining your income constraint. A budget constraint is a formal way of saying that your income is limited. So if I am successful in covering the first part of this chapter, which is to explain to you how a consumer makes his decisions, we're going to skip the entire chapter 10 and we will be going to appendix of this chapter, because this is probably the only chapter where the appendix is more important than the actual chapter content, where we're going to show how to draw a budget constraint. Okay? So budget constraint is actually the economist way of saying that we have scarcity of our income. Our income is limited. We really cannot buy anything beyond our income. So you can think about income constraint just like a production possibility frontier. A production possibility frontier was a constraint for an economy. Budget constraint is a constraint for an individual. Are we all clear on that? But it gives you the same idea. How much or what things can you buy given your limited income? Okay, so given the budget constraint, we are now going to formally define the idea of utility. Utility is a measurement of satisfaction. It's how much happiness or satisfaction individuals get when they buy something. Okay, So if utility or satisfaction is measured by something called util, which is like meter or pound, here util measures your level of satisfaction, we can immediately move to a concept called marginal utility. Marginal utility refers to the additional satisfaction that you get by buying one additional unit of the output. Marginal utility is the extra utility that you get by buying one extra unit of output. This will be in your exam. Some definitions are more important than others. This is a very important definition. Either the definition itself or some variation of the definition will be in your exam. Now, we are going to look at some graphical representation of this idea called utility and this idea called marginal utility. The numbers that we are about to see are made up numbers. They don't have any real life implications. What we're going to see in a minute has a name, and the name will be in your exam too. What we're going to see in a minute is something that we have seen in a different context. It is called law of diminishing marginal utility. Whenever I cover consumer behavior, I always talk about this example that is very dear to me, and because I don't know why, because I have been using it for so many times. I always want to talk about the market for orange, and how do we make our decision to buy oranges. The example really goes back to my country, because in USA you really can buy oranges throughout the year. But then there are countries where you can buy oranges for only a couple of months, and I'm from one of those countries. So imagine that you are in a country where oranges are available only for 3 months, and you are going to the market and you are seeing orange for the first time of the season. So the question is, how much are you going to be willing to pay for the first orange of the season? Are you all clear on the question? Any answer? How much will you be willing to pay for the first orange of the season? Probably a lot.
Above average.
Probably a lot or above average. The answer is incomplete, because what is a lot or above average is a relative concept, right? But we can argue that at the beginning of the season, an orange is very, very desirable to you, right? First orange of the season. Let's say you like orange. That's obviously an important issue. So if you are an enthusiast, and you would probably be willing to pay a high price for that. Imagine that you are now buying the 10th orange. You have already consumed the first 9, and you are buying the 10th one. How much would you be willing to pay for the 9th orange?
Less than the first.
Why?
Because you've already had 9.
Right, and your stomach is probably completely upset, and you really don't want to buy the 10th one. So the price that you would be willing to pay for the 10th would be much lower than the price that you would be willing to pay for the first one. Does it make sense? What I just talked about is something that you have seen before, but you saw it in a slightly different way. In a couple of chapters before, we looked at this idea called law of demand, which said that as the price goes down, people buy more. Right? That was the idea of law of demand. You remember that? I want to flip that argument, and I want to say that, let's say you are looking at a buyer, and you're looking at how much he is willing to pay for the first unit he is buying versus the 10th unit he is buying. Right? The first unit versus the 10th unit. And if you look at a consumer, let's say this is the orange example, our consumer would be willing to pay much higher price for the first unit than the 10th one. Do you all see that? As a result, you actually have a law of demand. You see that? For the lower quantity, you are willing to pay a higher price. For the higher quantity, you are willing to pay a lower price. The flip side of the law of demand. If I decide to cover additional material from chapter 10 after exam number 2, I will show you that the idea of demand is intrinsically connected with the idea of utility. Okay? But this will not be in your exam, number 2. So, based on our orange example, we could argue that as we buy more of something, we get less and less satisfaction from that good. It's called law of diminishing marginal utility. As you buy more, your extra utility or marginal utility goes down. And notice that it is written in red ink that it will be in your exam. So please study it. Okay, let's now, so that's the idea. So we talked about utility, we talked about marginal utility, we talked about diminishing marginal utility. What we're going to do now is we're going to look at some artificial made up numbers to really explain those or draw those ideas in a graphical setup. So you're looking at a table where the example is pizza, and second column gives you the total amount of satisfaction or total utility that you get by buying a certain number of pizza. When you are buying 0, you don't get any total utility. When you're buying 1, your total utility is 20. When you buy 6, your total utility is 51. Notice that as you buy more goods, your total utility goes up. Right? When you put this number in a graphical setup where utility is measured by the vertical axis, total quantity is measured by the horizontal axis, the graph that you're going to get will look like something like this. This is called a total utility curve. The total utility curve is concave. What does it mean? It means that the slope of this total utility curve sort of decreases as we move along. Do we all see that? The slope of this line is going down. This curve is becoming flatter. The slope of this line is nothing but the marginal utility of each of these concepts. But rather than looking at that, we will literally calculate our marginal utility. Where the marginal utility of the first unit is 0, you calculate marginal utility by looking at the total utility of one unit and subtract the total utility from the previous one. So when you are buying the second unit, the total utility of the first unit is 20. The total utility of buying 2 units is 16. Sorry, what am I doing? I apologize. So when you are buying the first unit, total utility is 20. When you are buying the second unit, total utility is 36. So the marginal utility that you are getting by buying the second unit is 36 minus 20, that is 16. When you are buying the third unit, total utility is 46. From the third unit, total utility was 26 from the second unit. So the marginal utility of buying the third unit is 46 minus 36, 10. Do we all see how we calculated those numbers? So marginal utility is the extra utility that you get by buying one extra unit of the output. So you calculate the marginal utility and you can see that as you are buying more and more, your marginal utility is going down. Which means that if you put this number in a two-dimensional space where marginal utility is measured by the vertical axis, quantity is measured by the horizontal axis, you will get a downward sloping marginal utility curve. As you buy more, your marginal utility goes down. If you pay attention to this graph, you would realize that this looks very similar to a demand curve. The only difference between this and your demand curve is that in your demand curve, price was measured by the vertical axis. Isn't that right? So, hopefully we will look at this idea of how this marginal utility curve and the demand curve are connected. For the time being, this is how much of marginal utility curve we're going to cover. Okay, so we have got some idea about satisfaction or utility. We also have some idea about budget constraint. So now we are in a position to ask the first question. Given that our consumer wants to maximize his satisfaction or utility and the budget constraint he has, how much of the goods will he be buying or she be buying? How do you make this complicated decision? Different goods have different price, different goods have different utility. What we just saw was how we calculate total utility when you are just buying one. good, just Coke, just just pizza. But in our realistic market buying purchasing decision, we buy a lot of things together, right? In this case, we're going to look at an example where you are buying pizza and Coke at the same time, because you believe that they are complementary goods. And this is a fairly complicated process, right? I have some limited income. I am trying to buy these two goods, and I have to make this serious decision of how much to buy from each of them. How do I make that decision? I probably like more pizza than my Coke, but I am buying both of them. So should I be only buying my pizza, or should I be only buying Coke, right? In this case, we are doing both. We are buying both of them. So how do I make a choice about how to buy this bundle? Okay? Are we all clear on the question? Questions are more important than answers in this particular chapter. Are we all clear on the question? Are we all convinced that this is actually quite an important question and a difficult question to answer? So, we're going to first talk about the theory that helps us to understand how these decisions are being made, and then we're going to look at how to expose that theory by using numbers, and then we're going to look at the implication of the theory. Three things. There are at least going to be two parts of this in your exam. Let's start with some artificial numbers first. So you are looking at a table where some informations about the two goods that you want to buy are provided. You can sort of divide this table into two parts. The first part gives you idea about how many pizzas or slices of pizza you can buy, the total utility that you can get, the marginal utility that you can derive from each of the items. So this is the first part is just a remake of the previous table. Okay? What we have done in this table is that we have added a second good. This is Coke, number, total utility, and marginal utility. Okay? So we have information about how much each unit of Coke and each unit of pizza give us, how much utility you get. Based on these numbers, can we decide how much Coke and how much pizza we are going to be buying? The answer is we cannot. Why? Because, first of all, it's not really clear which combination of these two goods I'm going to be buying. There are a lot of numbers, and these numbers by themselves really do not make any sense. In order to make sense of the purchasing decision of our buyer, we are going to introduce the price of these goods. We're going to assume that the price of Coke is about $1 and the price of pizza is $2 per slice. Some information, they're very, very useful. Now is the theory. Our theory says that our consumer will make their purchasing decisions in such a way that the marginal utility divided by the price of a good X will be equal to the marginal utility divided by the price of another good Y. So imagine that you are buying two goods, X and Y. You will buy X and Y up to the point where the marginal utility per X, marginal utility per dollar X divided by the price of X is equal to marginal utility per dollar, marginal utility of Y divided by price of Y. This looks kind of strange. We have not seen this condition before. I want to try to explain what this number is. Let's look at this number. This is a ratio where on the numerator you have marginal utility of X, and on the denominator you have the price of X. So on the numerator you have what you get, and on the denominator is what you pay. Isn't that right? So you have a ratio where marginal utility of x is what you get by buying one extra unit of x, and price of x is what you pay to get one extra unit of x. Do you all see that? So this ratio has a very, very important interpretation. I'm going to repeat that twice. I'm going to say it twice. When you look at this ratio tells you the rate at which you transform your dollar into utility. The rate at which you transform your dollar to utility. By paying P for each unit of X, you are getting that extra utility from that good that you have just purchased. So, MMUX divided by PX is actually the rate at which the money that is getting out of your pocket and utility is coming inside your pocket, right? So the ratio is a way of transforming the money that you're spending on good X. Are we all clear on that? This equilibrium condition tells us that regardless of how much utility you get by buying these two goods or whatever their underlying price is, you will be able to maximize your satisfaction when the marginal utility per dollar on good X is equal to marginal utility per dollar on good Y, and so on. Okay? We are going to look at this particular equilibrium condition later on when we look at the interpretation or implication of this equilibrium condition. Before we do that, we need to really understand how this equilibrium condition is obtained. How do we find that equilibrium condition? For the time being, let's just assume that this equilibrium condition is true. This is how our consumer is maximizing their satisfaction. Okay? If this is true, how are you going to find the right combination of pizza and Coke? The theory tells us that we are going to buy Coke and pizza in such a way that the marginal utility per dollar on these two goods are equal. When we look at the table, we notice immediately that there are various combinations of these two goods that satisfy that condition. Number one, you have a situation where when you buy one slice of pizza and you buy 3 units of Coke, you have marginal utility per dollar equal across these two. Do we all see that? How do we know that? We have in this table added slices of pizza. We have the marginal utility per dollar from the previous table. We have taken the price of pizza, which is $2, and we have divided that. We have divided marginal utility per dollar with that, and we have got the marginal utility per dollar. So that's the column that is important to us. Do we all see that? So we have the marginal utility per dollar on pizza, marginal utility per dollar on Coke. Now we are comparing them because our theory tells us that they have to be equal. So we have found one where the marginal utility per dollar are 10 and they are equal on both Pepsi and pizza. Are we all clear on that? Please take a moment to verify that this is true. So these two are same, but then there are other ones as well. There is another one where when you buy 3 slices of pizza and 4 slices of Coke, you also get the marginal utility per dollar equal across these two goods. Do we all see that? So second combination. We also have a third combination where when you buy 4 units of pizza and 5 units of Coke, you also have a situation where marginal utility per dollar are equal. Now we are in a very difficult position, right? So our theory said that we will be able to maximize our satisfaction whenever marginal utility per dollar of these two goods are equal. We have just found 3 different combinations that satisfy that requirement. So the question is, which one am I going to choose? Am I going to choose 1 slice of pizza with 3 cups of Coke, or should I choose 3 units of pizza with 4 cups of Coke, or something else? Are we all clear on the question? All of these combinations satisfy your equilibrium requirement. Which one are you going to choose? I want to get some intuition on this. Because the numbers really are not important. What is important is the intuition. Yes?
You can buy the cheaper one.
Very good. Let's modify that answer a little bit. We're going to say that given we can buy different combinations that maximize our satisfaction, so-called, whatever we are going to buy will depend on our budget constraint. Not the cheapest one, but the budget constraint. Right? And different people have different budget constraints. You could have more money than I am, then you are probably going to buy something that is different from mine. Are we all clear on that? So do we all see where the argument of budget constraint is now creeping in? Our income matters. How much money we have matters. And we're going to see that firsthand in the next slide. Okay. Let's calculate some numbers, more numbers, right? So we have identified these three different combinations of goods that give us equal marginal utility per dollar. Notice that marginal utility per dollar are not the same. For the first combination it was 10 in each case. For the second combination it was 5 in each case. For the third combination it was 3 in each case. Now, in order to really connect our budget constraint with our actual decision, we are now going to calculate the cost of each of these bundle. In the first bundle, you are buying 1 slice of pizza and 3 cups of Coke. So the amount that you have to spend is 2 times 1, that's the cost of pizza, plus 3 times 1, that's the cost on Coke. So it's $5. Do we all see that? The cost on the second bundle is 10, the cost on the third bundle is 13. So different bundle costs you different quantity of money. To make things even more complicated, the associated total utility from these bundles are also different. So notice that in the first combination, we have 1 pizza and 3 cups of Coke. 1 pizza and 3 cups of Coke. If we go back to our original data, the utility from buying the first pizza is 20. The utility of buying 3 cups of Coke is 45. So the total utility from buying these two is 65. Right? Do you all see that? So the total utility that you get by buying 1 piece of pizza and 3 cups of Coke is 65. The total utilities associated with the second bundle is 96. The total utility associated with the third bundle is 105. So these 3 bundles cost different. They also give you different levels of satisfaction. Which one are you going to buy? Which one are you going to buy?
Whatever your budget allows.
Absolutely. It's a very simple idea, but it's a very powerful idea. Please do not ignore this. It's a trivial idea. When you look at these 2 bundles, you would realize that when you spend more money, you get more utility, right? It's a no-brainer. You spend more money, you get goods that are more extravagant, that gives you more satisfaction. But the problem is that you really cannot spend more money than what you have, right? So the answer to our last question is that you are going to buy. So let's summarize what we have done. In the process, so far we have understood that by equating the marginal utility per dollar, we can come up with different combination of goods that can maximize our utility. We have found 3. Each of these gives you different level of total utility, and each of them costs different level of money. And we are going to choose one of these bundles that really matches up with our budget. If my budget is $5, notice that I am going to definitely buy the first combination. If my budget is $13, I'm never going to buy the first combination. Do you all see that? If my budget is $13, I will go for the third combination. And that is very much consistent with how we look at our purchasing decisions. So, let us now look at interpretation of this equilibrium condition. I have 4 minutes, but in the 4 minutes, I will talk about one question that will be in your exam. So please pay attention. Let us go back to the condition that we have just written down. Mu x divided by y, a price of x, mu y divided by price of y. What does this equilibrium really means for us? Right? The first thing that this equilibrium condition is telling us that the goods that you are buying could have different level of utility. They can have different level of marginal utility. One could be a car and the other one could be a can of milk. Their price is different. One is very expensive, the other one is very cheap. Their level of utility is also going to be different. So in this very complex consumer world, the way you maximize your utility is by finding the level where these ratios are all equal, right? So by ensuring that this equilibrium condition is satisfied, you are, and I want to be absolutely certain, and this is an expression that took me a long time to understand. By equating these ratios, you are getting this. Okay? What does that mean? Bang for the buck, right? It means that you are probably allocating different amount of money in these two goods. The level of satisfaction that you are getting is probably also different. But you are transforming your money in the same way for these two, right? You could be allocating more money for good X than good Y because they are price different, but that's not important. What is important that you are always getting the same kind of return on these two goods in terms of utility. Do you all see that? Do you all see that? I have 1 minute, and in the 1 minute, I want to immediately draw your attention to the question that will be in the exam. Imagine, please stay with me for 1 minute. Imagine that this is happening. Imagine that rather than having an equilibrium, you have a disequilibrium. What do? Look at this ratio very, very carefully. A variation of this question is in your exam. So your marginal utility per dollar on X is greater than marginal utility per dollar on good Y. What do? So you see that the bang for the buck is higher for good X. Good X is giving you more return in terms of your money, right? What should you do? Should you buy more of it? Yes. Do you all understand that if this is true and you are getting more return from your good X, you are going to buy more X, right? When you buy more X, according to our diminishing marginal utility, your marginal utility from X is going to go down, right? So if the left hand side starts going down, you probably will reach to an equilibrium again. Do you all see that? The left hand side was larger. As marginal utility per dollar goes down, the left hand side starts going down and you might have an equilibrium. But that's not the entire story. There is a second part of the story which is equally important. When you buy more of X, what happens to your purchase of Y? When you buy more of X, how much of Y can you buy? When you buy more of X, you buy less Y, right? Because you have a budget constraint. If you buy more X, you buy less Y. When you buy less Y, according to law of marginal utility, your marginal utility on Y goes up. This is not inconsistent. Our law of diminishing marginal utility says that as we buy more, our marginal utility goes down, which means that if you buy less, marginal utility goes up. So you are having two things happening at the same time. Marginal utility per dollar on X is going down, marginal utility on Y is going up. So finally, you could have an equilibrium and everything is restored back again. Thank you very much.